A very good afternoon, dear Madam Miranti, and I'm Fazana Faiz, here ready to present my research study based on the impact of motivational and educational factors for the willingness to communicate in English among secondary school students in the Galle Education Zone. Moving on to the outline of the study, so I will be discussing the introduction, then the problem statement, scope, rationale, research questions, research objectives, the literature review, methodology, limitations, analysis, and finally the conclusions with the findings. Moving on to the background of the study. So actually English serves as a vital medium for communication in academic and professional settings, especially in a globalized context where students and professionals are aspired to study abroad in a professional setting. So proficiency, according to Crystal 2003, proficiency in English enhances an upward social mobility in a globalized context. So when we look into the proficiency in English, it's necessary for bridging the economic and social gaps in the Sri Lanka's multicultural society. So in the Sri Lankan context, English is taught as a secondary language in the national curriculum. Despite of the structured English curriculum education that we find here, the students easily get through and graduate with insufficient communication skills. So the lack of students' motivation, which is sustained, and ineffective teaching methodologies and limited real-world practices could remain as a significant barrier. So basically, the students, especially the secondary level students, has this fear of making mistakes, or the societal stigma which is attached to speaking English imperfectly leads to their inhibit students' willingness to communicate in English. And also, according to Peng and Woodrow 2010, according to that study, it is mentioned that a teacher is a significant player in students' engagement and encouraging students' communication. So indeed, teacher plays a critical role in engaging students and fostering their communication skills in a better manner. Moving on to the next slide, the problem statement. When we look into the problem statement, despite of the years of formal education, secondary students in the Galle Education Zone exhibit a low willingness to communicate in English. So this reluctance to communicate in English is influenced by the interrelated motivational factors and educational factors, including their low self-esteem, their self-confidence, less self-confidence, and their insufficient teacher support in that relevant context. So the lack of comprehensive strategies to enhance their communication skills may negatively affect the country's economic future and their international recognition. So understanding the impact of these factors is essential for developing actionable strategies to improve students' willingness to communicate in English. Moving on to the next slide, let's look into the scope of the study. So this research is focused on the secondary school students, especially in the grade 10s and 11s in the Galle Education Zone. So the main variables of this study is taken as the motivational and educational barriers and their willingness to communicate in English. So as the current study only focuses on these grade 10s and 11 students, and also it is confined to Galle Education Zone, may limit the generalizability of the findings. Moving on to the rationale of the study, the importance of English communication is definitely a crucial thing to ponder upon for academic success and also their professional advancement. So basically, overcoming this communication obstacles can boost their students' willingness to communicate in English and provide equal opportunities for all in Sri Lanka. So there is limited studies on the combined effects of motivational and educational factors on students' willingness to communicating in English, especially among the secondary school students. So it aims, when we talk about the benefits of these findings, it aims to help the students succeed academically, not only academically but also professionally, while aiding teachers in improving their teaching methodologies and by inculcating interactive sessions in their classroom context. And the research aim is to identify practical strategies to overcome these barriers and enhance the willingness to communicate in English in the Sri Lankan context. Moving on to the next slide, we have the research questions as to where it is going to discuss about what is the impact of motivational factors on students' willingness to communicate, and how educational factors, particularly teacher support, affect the students' willingness to communicate in English, and also what is the level of willingness to communicate in English among secondary school students, particularly in the Galle Education Zone. And then we have our research objectives, where I have analyzed to analyze the impact of motivational factors on students' willingness to communicate, and to examine the influence of educational factors, particularly the teacher support, on students' willingness to communicate, and to assess the level of willingness to communicate in English among the secondary school students in the Galle Education Zone. Next, we have the existing research studies. So when we look into the self-determination theory, which was introduced by Decky and Ryan in 1985, it highlights the core concept that this motivation is driven by intrinsic and extrinsic factors, and it also emphasized that motivation is influenced through personal satisfaction and also external rewards. So according another study where a Chinese study which is done by Peng 2012, the students' opinions about their own language skills frequently affect their motivation to learn English. So students are more inclined to communicate in English when they feel more capable, which raises WTC, which is also known as willingness to communicate in English, by aligning with the self-determination theory. So the findings of these researchers are like, it indicates that the factors like self-confidence and competence in communication are the primary drivers where it increases the WTC of students. But still, there is a gap. There is a limited research on the specific impact of motivational and educational factors on WTC among secondary school students in multicultural contexts like Sri Lanka. Moving on to the next study by Fan 2024, there he identifies that self-motivation, language proficiency, and classroom environment as key factors affect the willingness to communicate in English. And Yashima in 2002 found a positive correlation between the Japanese learners' international posture and their WTC, where it indicates that motivation is tied to a global participation, which enhances their communication skills. So through these prior research supports that both intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors are crucial for their improvement in their willingness to communicate in English. There is still a gap where their studies do not fully address their socio-cultural complexities in non-Western countries like Sri Lanka, and there leaves a gap in understanding that how these factors, motivational and educational factors, interact in the Sri Lankan context. So moving on to the next study by Fernando and Gunasekara, which examine the link between English proficiency and socio-economic privilege in Sri Lanka. So revealing that higher proficiency increases their opportunities for communication. But there in this finding, what we found is in the study we find there is a finding mentioned as the rural students, especially the rural students in Sri Lanka, struggle to access quality English education because of the lack of exposure to English communication and as well as their limited practice skills. There is a need for more, so the gap that is found here is that there is a need for more comprehensive research based on how these socio-economical factors and educational barriers collectively impact WTC. So particularly for rural students. And then we find Vijay Thunga and Vitanage in 2017 has also identified that exam-oriented nature of these Sri Lankan students in the education system, there is a barrier to develop communication skills, where there is a limited interactive sessions among the classroom context, and also their communicative activities has a low value of communicating in English in their real life context as well. So there is a need for further research to explore how this exam oriented focus specifically affects students' willingness to communicate in English, and to identify some effective strategies in order to overcome this gap. So the overall gap of the interplay of motivational and educational barriers on WTC remains underexplored, and especially among the secondary school students in the Galle Education Zone. Moving on to the methodology, so the study mainly employs both quantitative and qualitative research design, where quantitative methods are used to identify the relationship between the variables and measure the students' performances numerically, while qualitative analysis is mainly used here in order to get an in-depth context and meaning to this study. So the study is mainly grounded in the philosophy of pragmatism, and also the research approach is inductive and deductive, where interviews and observations were conducted, and also some questionnaires were conducted respectively under the research approaches of inductive and deductive approaches. And then we have this mixed approach, and also the experimental and case study is done as the research strategy. Also the time horizon is cross-sectional, as the questionnaire was given only once in order to get a clear idea of the questionnaire, a proper impact on it. Then we are moving on to the next part, where the participants was only 50 students of grade 10s and 11s in the Galle Education Zone among the secondary school students, and the data collection was done through pre-test, post-test, and also the questionnaires was mainly focused on motivational and educational barriers to the willingness to communicate in English. And the interview was conducted with 6 students randomly selected from the same sample size of 50 students. So 6 students were incorporated, and they were used in order to get this interview done. So they have participated. 6 students have been participated for the interview among the 50 students out of the sample size. And the SPSS software was used for paired t-test and the correlation analysis, and the case study which was used is the interviews for the analysis for a thematic analysis. Moving on to the next part, where we now come for the data analysis and interpretations. So basically, the reliability statistics, the reliability of the questionnaire for quantitative analysis was tested through the Cronbach's alpha value. So according to the table, the Cronbach's alpha value for the selected item shows 0.962, which indicates an excellent internal consistency, and the questionnaire has yielded consistently similar results across its items and the participants. Moving on to the next one, the reliability statistics, and now here in the ANOVA table for reliability, the F value is high and the P value is low, and it suggests that at least one barrier can significantly affect the willingness to communicate. So as the F value is considerably large, which is 4.931, and the significance value was 0.00, this suggests that the variability between the participants is statistically significant. And also a larger sum of squares, which is 618.308 between the people, shows that the participants' responses are different from each other. And the grand mean value of the grand mean value of 3.61, which gives an idea how participants scored across the scale. So here the grand mean value of 3.61, which gives shows the average of all participants' responses, which is more inclined into an agree state in the Likert scale. So all in all, so the scale is highly reliable and has a strong consistency across the items. Moving on to the next normality test that we have done, including the questionnaire survey. The normality of the data set was tested based on the skewness and the kurtosis of the data. So according to the above table, the skewness and the kurtosis values for motivational factors and educational factors variables lie within the accepted range of plus or minus 1. So the skewness of WTC is within the range, while the kurtosis value is slightly outside the range, which is minus 1.072. However, the deviation is minimal and still acceptable for the analysis. So through the both tests that was done, and it indicates the data is normally distributed among the respondents. Moving on to the next slide, the paired sample t-test was mainly conducted to check whether the intervention has impacted the students' performance. So basically, this was tested by comparing the pre-test and the post-test scores. So here the table shows that the mean of the pre-test is 38.6 and 79.06 is the post-test. So this implies a substantial increase in scores after the intervention. So the average post-test score was significantly higher than the pre-test score. So it shows an improvement in scores after the intervention. Having a higher standard deviation for post-test shows here the dispersion of post-test scores are really high, and it has been there is an improvement in the after the intervention. Next, when we look into the table, here the mean difference of the test was 40.46. On average, the post-test scores were 40.46 points higher than the pre-test scores, which means and also the 95% confidence interval of the difference were 37.489 to 43.431. So the significant value is less than 0.05, and this difference is statistically significant, and it implies that the intervention had a significant impact on the students' performance. Moving on to the next slide, the correlation analysis was conducted to find out whether the motivational and educational factors that were assumed to have a relationship with the communication, the willingness to communicate in English, and the relationship, the correlation between these two independent variables with the dependent variable. So here, when we look into the first first factor with the correlation between the motivational factors and willingness to communicate, we find that the Pearson correlation coefficient value for willingness to communicate and motivational factors is 0.636, and the significant value is less than 0.04. So therefore, it is clear that the motivational factors significantly affect students' willingness to communicate in English, and the relationship between these two variables is positive and moderately strong. Moving on to the next correlation between the motivational factors and the willingness to communicate, here we find the Pearson correlation coefficient of willingness to communicate in English and the educational factor is 0.708, and the significant value is 0.000. So therefore, it is clear that the educational factors, including teacher support, significantly impact the students' willingness to communicate in English. So the relationship between educational factors and WTC is higher than the motivational factor. So it implies that students' willingness to communicate can be enhanced by facilitating educational factors like teacher support and opportunities to engage in activities, and also which is higher than the motivational factor. Moving on to the next case study approach. Here, in the case study approach, there were 6 secondary level students from the sample were selected to furthering the qualitative study, and also the case study was utilized in order to get the positive outcome of it, and the thematic analysis was also employed to identify the recurring patterns and themes in the transcripts. And there were some of the themes and the codes that were identified through this case study. In the first theme of motivation, the codes were future aspirations, confidence, and fear of judgment. And also the second factor, educational factors, there were codes such as teaching methods and teacher support. And the willingness to communicate, which is the last theme that we have taken, that I've taken here, is coded according to the limited opportunities, informal and external opportunities, and the comfort zones. So accordingly, future aspirations serves as a strong motivator for learning English, and also like students often experience this fear of judgment and their low self-confidence and their ability to speak in English fluently in the formal settings. So most of the responses were also like mentioning the fear of judgment, where it was aligning as a code where they lack motivation in their speaking ability. So engaging in interactive teaching methods can boost the students' interest in English speaking activities. Also, the support from the teacher support is mainly important, as it enhances the students' confidence in using English. Also, students have fewer opportunities to practice their speaking skills, speaking abilities at school compared to the outside environments in an informal setting. So creating a supportive, I would say that creating a supportive learning environment with more speaking opportunities would in schools, especially in schools, can significantly enhance the students' willingness to communicate in English. And in conclusion, there were some of the major findings of this study, where both motivational and educational factors impact students' willingness to communicate in English. Also, providing teacher guidance along with motivation can enhance the students' performance. And there is a high impact on the educational factors, where educational factors, particularly the teacher support and the teaching methodologies, should have a greater impact on WTC than the motivational factor. Also, the limited school opportunities that they have. The students perceive only fewer opportunities to practice their English communication skills at school compared to the informal settings. So in the current teaching methodologies, when we view that, there is a disengaging and non-interactive environment where which influences students' belief that education affects their willingness to communicate in English. Also, in all, the current study was developed and conducted by understanding a considerable low willingness to communicate in English among secondary school students in the Galle Education Zone. And this correlation analysis showed a positive relationship between the motivational and educational factors and the willingness to communicate in English. Also, the semi-structured interviews revealed a low willingness to communicate in English due to the inadequate teacher support and the non-interactive teaching methods and their limited speaking opportunities in schools. And the study successfully achieved the objectives by providing constructive conclusions, and also the corresponding research questions were answered, indicating the overall success of the research study. And the future suggestions is like one of the major recommendations and the suggestion that is needed to be done is to increase the generalizability of the study by increasing the sample size and the geographical scope. And the teachers should increase, also the teachers should increase their teacher support in order to enhance and boost up the students' confidence in speaking in English. And also the students should need more opportunities to use English, especially in their comfortable classroom environments, through English speaking clubs, drama, or inculcating various debate activities, and so on. So encouraging the use of digital platforms can also enhance the students' engagement in English learning, and providing them constructive feedbacks would definitely improve the communication efforts of the students. So, and yes, these are the references that I have included, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Show the topic please again. Right, okay, so it's a good attempt, actually a very good attempt. I would like to give you my comment. Show me the first page please, first slide please.
Yes.
With the title please.
This is the title.
Right, okay. So Fazana, I think we have gone through several drafts, and by now what is really good is the fact that you have very clearly given me a proper methodology with the